At the outset of the film, a girl named Sita, accompanied by her brother, opens the grave of a deceased man and lies down within it. Sita is driven by a desire to ascertain whether individuals are held accountable for their misdeeds after death. As her brother completes the final touches on the grave, he takes a seat beside her. Sita activates a camera just as the grave is sealed. Unbeknownst to her brother, a snake begins to slither into the grave from above. Sita's unusual experiment is rooted in her traumatic past. She witnessed the loss of her parents in a bomb explosion, which instilled in her the belief that virtuous individuals do not always meet favorable ends, while malevolent ones exploit the world without facing consequences, even in death. This notion contradicts what she learned from her teacher, Lillian, who asserted that the repercussions for wrongdoers persist beyond death. Following the tragic event, Sita and her brother were placed in an orphanage, where Lillian's teacher reiterated that the fates of the wicked remain dire, even in the afterlife. However, Sita remained skeptical and sought to disprove her teacher's claims. To this end, she ventured into a room that had remained untouched, as it was rumored to be haunted, causing those who entered to vanish. Accompanied by her brother Adil, she stepped inside. She ventured further inside, only to be met with an overwhelming darkness. Strangely, as she delved deeper, Adil and Sita found themselves unable to see or hear one another. Concerned for her brother, Sita pressed on and encountered a frightened child within the tunnel. However, this was not an ordinary child, it was the essence of his soul. When the child introduced himself in an unsettling manner, Sita felt a surge of fear. The child's name was Isma, and his eerie tone startled her, prompting her to retreat from the tunnel. Upon exiting, she discovered Adil waiting for her alongside the villagers, who had returned to the orphanage. Despite her return, Sita was plagued by a singular question: how had Isma's soul ended up in this tunnel, and why was it wandering in such a manner? She began to follow the teachers and staff at the orphanage, eavesdropping on their conversations. One day, while listening to a discussion between a teacher and a caretaker, Sita uncovered the true nature of Isma. She learned that the orphanage had been established by a wealthy man, but his intentions were far from benevolent. He had not created the orphanage to aid the children. An orphanage was established by an individual who dedicated himself to supporting the vulnerable children residing there. He selectively took in children he favored, while wealthy individuals exploited those less fortunate. Ismail was among the many unfortunate children who suffered injustices at the hands of affluent people. Since that time, his spirit has been wandering within the confines of a tunnel. Sita learns that this time, he has chosen a specific child. The teachers mentioned that after that fateful night, Ismail was never seen again, but Sita had glimpsed him in the tunnel. Determined to rescue her brother, Sita hurried to him, but before she could reach him, he was seized by two individuals. Fearing that Sita might pose a threat, they captured her as well and confined her in a storeroom, sealing its windows and doors. In her quest to save her brother, Sita summoned her resolve and attempted to break the sealed windows using her scarf, ultimately succeeding. Upon her escape, she encountered the caretaker, who had brought money and essential items to aid Sita in rescuing her brother and fleeing the area. The caretaker also informed her of the direction in which her brother was being taken. As Sita fled through the forest, she reached a road where she needed to catch a vehicle. She struck a stone to distract the driver and then made her escape with her brother. The narrative then shifts to a decade later, where Sita is now an adult working in a nursing home. Despite the passage of time, memories of her parents linger in her mind, and she reflects on the notion that the fates of the wicked and the virtuous are ultimately the same after death. She believes that only the wicked persist in the world beyond, indifferent to the consequences, while the virtuous receive neither reward nor peace. Sita is determined to prove this theory and is prepared to go to great lengths to do so. For her experiment, she targets the owner of the orphanage, a man who had committed heinous acts against children, now residing in the same nursing home. She begins by gathering all the necessary resources. In the presence of several elders, candles were lit for a ritual. However, they found themselves one man short and requested Sita to take his place. Despite her fear, the ritual could not proceed without her participation. As Sita sat down, the spirit of the deceased elder woman entered the shaman, who began to speak in her voice. Upon hearing her voice, The woman's husband attempted to express his remorse, but she responded that forgiveness would only come if he killed the woman with whom he had betrayed her. Sensing something was amiss, Sita urgently requested the shaman to halt the ritual. However, the other elders echoed the deceased woman's demand to kill the woman. Feeling increasingly threatened, Sita stood up, extinguished their ritual candles, and opened the curtains, effectively breaking the ritual. She rushed to protect the nurse, but just as she reached her, the old man arrived with the intent to harm. Sita managed to usher the nurse into a room and shut the door, only to discover another man inside who fatally stabbed the nurse. When the old man questioned why he had killed an innocent, he received no answer. Responses that I do not wish to experience after death were prompted by a woman who requested that I punish a certain girl. Upon hearing this, California began to doubt the situation. California recalled having seen Sita's morning show but found that Sita could not substantiate any claims regarding whether the deceased are punished. In her quest for answers, she searched online and discovered that many viewers were impressed by Sita's show, leading them to replicate her experiment. This time, numerous unusual occurrences were documented, including screams and cries from the graves of those who had lived poorly, while some graves appeared to find peace, suggesting that punishment may indeed occur after death. Sita was astonished by these findings and pondered why such phenomena had not been observed with Lai. Driven by curiosity, she promptly excavated Lai's grave to investigate further. However, what she encountered was shocking. There were no remains of Lai. Suddenly, soil and leaves began to cascade into the grave. In an attempt to escape, she dug a hole in front of her and entered it. As she maneuvered through, the soil behind her sealed off her exit. Sita continued onward and discovered a tunnel, the same one where she had previously encountered Mile. This tunnel was unfamiliar to her in the city, and California speculated that perhaps the lack of oxygen was affecting her perception. Sita experienced vivid hallucinations, but in an instant, she recognized his familiar voice, which indicated that he was also within the same tunnel. Upon entering, she glimpsed her childhood through a glass window, where her parents stood, waving their hands at her. Overcome with emotion, Sita began to weep at the sight of them. However, just as quickly, this vision vanished, and the tunnel reverted to its original state, prompting her to continue moving forward. At that moment, she heard Law's expressions of regret and the echoes of screams. As Sita advanced, she encountered her friends from the orphanage, with his standing among them. Sita pondered whether this was merely another hallucination, recalling that ghosts could only be seen if one believed in them. She closed her eyes, resolved not to perceive anything further, and when she reopened them, the orphanage children were indeed before her. Then, Iz approached her with a smile. He reprimanded her, asking why she had abandoned him that day, expressing his fear that someone was following him. Upon hearing this, Sita became anxious and noticed the monstrous sound approaching from above. In response, Mile reassured her, stating that he was no longer afraid and urged her not to be frightened either. He suggested that they escape by jumping into the tunnel together, which was quite deep, and offered a refuge from the advancing monster. Consequently, Sita leapt into the tunnel alongside Mile. When she regained consciousness, she found herself lying next to Lai. Sita turned to see Lai beside her aunt, believing she had merely experienced a terrifying dream. She screamed for Dil. However, no one responded to her cries for help. At that moment, a snake slithered into the grave and coiled around Sita, biting her before entering Lai's mouth. As soon as the snake entered, Lai awakened. A figure sat down as someone violently struck the head of Lab with a hammer. Blood tears cascaded down Ka's face, leaving her utterly terrified. However, this was merely the beginning. Lab's head was brutally crushed, and the resulting splatter covered Ka's face and eyes, intensifying her fear. Yet, this was only the start. Lab's head was restored, only to endure further torment in the same gruesome manner. Instead of a tongue, a multitude of snakes emerged from her mouth, writhing across her body. Then, something even more surreal manifested, intent on inflicting harm upon Lab. Sita found herself frozen in terror. Fortunately, at that critical moment, Adil unearthed a grave and rescued her. Sita was profoundly disturbed by the events she had witnessed, leading her to a stark realization: Those who embody evil ultimately face retribution. Thus, the narrative reaches its conclusion.